I count cows following me as harassment. I hated it. But I did climb up to the roof of my friend's barn when they all followed me because I'm a ginger and I look very different, and apparently cows are extremely curious, so they saw this orange blob and they were like, neat friend, and I was like, oh no, not your friend, and climbed to the roof of a barn and shrieked for help.
Yeah,
I know
so
that
surprising.
it's mirrored in like cats and dogs, and I was gonna say, to discredit my own fear, I'm not at all afraid of large cats and large dogs. I actually trained tigers for a few years.
Hello and welcome to Talk Ag to Me, the podcast dedicated to improving ag literacy around the globe. I'm your host, Brandon Black, and in today's episode, we're joined by another podcast host by the name of Amie, and she's going to talk to us all about her interest in guerrilla gardening and just generally other curiosities she has about the agriculture industry. She also got a distinct fear of livestock for some reason, but we'll get into that later. This conversation kind of just started off with no introduction, so I'm kind of just going to drop you guys right in the middle of the conversation. Everything that came before it isn't super important, so I'm just going to kind of put you where the interesting stuff started to kind of come out. So I hope you all enjoy and hope you stay till the end and check it out. I know it's a bit of a longer one, but it's a really fun conversation, so go check Amie out and show all of her support on all of her great stuff, and I'll put all the links down in the description. And yeah, thanks so much for tuning in. I hope you enjoy.
I did. I listened to, oh gosh, what was it called? It was the one where you had your pal talking about automation and robots.
Oh yeah, Patrick.
yeah, that's where I thought your name was Patrick. Sorry. Then that was the episode I listened to. It was really quite interesting.
Gotcha.
I did not realize that there were machines that were quite that articulated is the word I'm looking for, capable of so much like delicate task. I knew about the tree shakers, but I figured they were all kind of in the same bucket of like, well, it will get your crops, but like, you know, you might want to stand clear.
Right.
So I definitely learned quite a bit from it. And I'm fascinated, honestly, at whatever you throw at me, because this is something I don't know much about. Agriculture, like where everything comes from, how it's made, what makes that easier to do, harder to do, all that stuff. So I guess I have all of the questions, and I'm willing to be pointed in the general vicinity where I should be asking them.
Awesome. Well, that's the perfect mentality to have going into an episode. You know, we're all about answering questions and making sure that you get all your questions answered and all that. There's really no wrong direction for the conversation to go, and there's no there's no such thing as a stupid question. So
awesome. I'll have plenty then.
Awesome. Well, yeah, that was kind of the main mentality of the conversation that you listened to was, ask any question you want, and that's kind of where the foundation for the whole which Star Wars droid makes the best farming robot came from.
Exactly. That's an excellent question too, especially given the whole water farming thing. I was curious of the implications, but anyway, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, and that sparked a lot of conversations. I've had I actually had an entire episode dedicated to Star Wars and agriculture just because of that one question. So
spectacular, good.
Yeah,
a whole spin-off series.
Yeah. So and I've done previous episodes where I talk about agriculture and how it ties into movies and video games, and so really anything is on the table for the question because I'm trying to prove the claim that everything relates to agriculture in some way, shape, or form.
I believe that. Okay, I guess I have a question about you. So tell me about your history with agriculture, why you're doing this podcast, that whole shtick.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am actually I'm going to turn 21 in 3 months. So I'm a college student.
Happy early birthday.
Thank you. And so I was born and raised in a small town in Central California called Tulare. I'm not sure if you've ever heard of us.
I actually have for very weird reasons, but continue.
Okay, well, I'll inquire about that in a minute. But yeah, so I was born and raised in Tulare, and so in Tulare we kind of call it cow town. We're all about dairies, and most of the agriculture in Tulare is based around the dairy industry. We have silage cornfields, and there's actually a sudden rise in tree in tree fruit and tree nuts growing in Tulare. So we have pistachio, almond, walnut trees. And all that kind of stuff. Cotton is kind of popular. So we're fairly diversified in our agriculture in Tulare, but mostly dairy is kind of our staple. And so I grew up, around agriculture my entire life, but it was never really something I was super interested in.
Sure.
It was always kind of something that like my family did and that, I was generally connected to, but it wasn't something that I was super passionate about particularly. I was more interested in mechanics, engineering, inventing, that kind of stuff. I was
droids, sure.
Exactly. I was a science nerd growing up, and as you can see, not much has changed. I was very passionate about, mechanics and engineering. I was determined to be Iron Man. That was like my goal in life was to.
He's got to get the buku bucks, and then it's all downhill from there, right?
Exactly. And so yeah, that was kind of the inspiration. And so from there, I studied, mechanical engineering. And I went back and forth between that and kind of like a zoology-based career for most of my early childhood. So when I was in 5th grade, so I was about 10 years old, I decided I wanted to be a zoologist, which I'm not sure why I knew what that was when I was 10 years old, but
that is not uncommon. Both my housemate and I wanted to be marine biologists when we were 5, but it was a tie between that and zoologist. And I can't tell you how many people I've talked to that said the exact same thing, like zoologist versus marine biologist. Precisely. And I wonder if there was like a children's book series or something that I'm just not remembering. But
there could have been.
There must have been a trend, right? Like that's surely
that's
really specific.
Right? And so that's crazy. There must have been something, in our childhood that just kind of just brought that to our attention.
Must have.
But yeah, I don't know. So like I found my love for animals through my sister because she was a huge, animal fanatic. She, she researched all kinds of stuff about animals. She actually trains horses for a living. That's like her long-term career now.
That is bonkers. Oh my gosh.
Right.
That is super cool. Good for her.
Yeah. And so she actually studied, horse psychology. She studied like equine behavior and like all this like, super complicated stuff. And she spent like years, while she was in high school and her early years in college studying horse psychology and like the behavior and history between like the equine species and humans, like all this kind of stuff. So she knows all of it. I mean, like she's, a horse expert among horse experts. And so
is that like a veterinary study then? Like the psychology and behavioral, or is that like its own unique? Okay, cool. Interesting.
So yeah, so she was actually studying to be a vet, and then she decided she wanted to specialize in horses, and so she almost became an equine vet, but she was much more interested in how the horses behaved rather than how their bodies worked. Sure. And so which she's interested in that as well, because she's, like I said, she's the reason I was so I was so interested in biology and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, so she went into that, and that's that was her main career. But she's I grew up learning how to do everything because of her. She basically, because she's 5 years older than me, so she basically raised me.
Fantastic.
And so she actually taught me like how to read. So I was reading around like the age of like 3 or 4, which I very recently found out is not normal.
Yeah, big sis got you up and at it.
So yeah, I was like reading to like my kindergarten class, and I blew all of their minds, which I didn't know why at the time. Now I know that it's not normal for a 3-year-old to be able to read, but I have her to thank for that. So anyway, so that was kind of like my early childhood was like, getting involved in like animals and like it's kind of like engineering, inventing kind of stuff too. And then around like my freshman year of high school, I was really into that inventing thing. I started studying chemistry and chemical engineering and all this kind of stuff, got really into the science of it. I was determined to get involved in prosthetics, like all this stuff sounded really interesting to me. Mm-hmm. And my parents were both involved in a high school leadership program called FFA. I'm not sure if you're familiar.
I'm not. No. What is that?
Okay. So FFA is short for Future Farmers of America. And so it's a youth leadership organization mostly for high school students, although recently we've expanded to 7th and 8th graders as well.
Okay, and cool.
Basically the premise behind it is to teach young kids, leadership skills like public speaking, job interview, networking, resume building kind of stuff, just general like team leading, problem solving, just, all that kind of stuff. But it's founded in agriculture. So we learned all of those skills in agricultural context. We even learned like some of our basic stuff like we had an ag biology class. So we learned about biology, but through ag terms, and we learned about like math and economics through ag terms. And so a lot of our basic classes were taught in an agricultural context because they believed that it gave more of a practical use to the information we were learning, and it wasn't just conceptual.
That's nice. That's actually that's really clever.
Right. And so that was kind of my first exposure to agriculture as like as a lifestyle, as an industry, because I grew up always just like seeing like my neighbors and like, my family friends that had dairies, and I was kind of like, oh yeah, they're dairymen. Like that's, that's just what they do. But like this was my first exposure with like, how large agriculture is and how many different things it really touches. And so I got really, really into it. I mean, like, because I raised beef cattle throughout high school, just like
Sure.
my dad did and just like his dad did. And so I was kind of a, a third generation beef guy.
Sure. Is that
And
the
so,
technical term?
yes, that is an official term. But I was very involved in that kind of, aspect of it. And similar to my sister, I was really involved in animal behavior. I studied like the behavior of cattle, and as opposed to horses, I was more interested in the cattle side of things. And I actually taught younger kids who were younger than me about the cattle and how they behaved and all that kind of stuff. And as I got older and got into high school more and more, I started teaching the other kids how to handle their animals and how to properly care for them. So that way, for one, they can have a good relationship with their animal and they won't get hurt, and for two, their animal is
Sure.
healthy and happy and all that kind of stuff. And so,
Right.
as I got into that, my teachers started to notice how, for one, how much I was learning about agriculture, and for two, how much of a positive influence I was on the younger kids.
Uh-huh.
And they approached me and said, "Hey, you should really study to be an ag teacher. You'd be a phenomenal ag teacher."
Oh,
And
awesome. Is that the path you're taking?
that is. So I'm
That's
going
so
to
cool.
yeah, I'm going to college to be an ag teacher. And
That is spectacular. Good for
yeah,
you.
so-
You really found your calling.
yeah, thank you. I really did. And that was kind of like the first time that I started to notice that like something I did actually felt like it meant something. It wasn't just me,
Right.
talking to my wall about machines. It was something like,
Right.
that was actually like I could actually see the progress of my skills,
Sure.
And so I was like, at that point, because like when I was a freshman, I was shy and scared and I didn't like talking to people.
Of course.
But I saw these, so in FFA, we had different levels of officer rank. And so
Sure.
officers are like the leaders of like the local groups. And so there's like the chapter officer, which is like the local level. It's like of your school. And then there's like the sectional officer, then the regional officer, and then the state officer, and then the national officers.
Mm-hmm.
So I saw the state officers for the first time. Like I went to our state convention and I saw the state officers on the stage like giving speeches, and they were talking about how they like were working with kids all around the state and how they're like doing all this great stuff, and they're teaching kids about agriculture. And I was like, that is exactly what I want to do with my life.
Oh,
And
awesome.
I worked towards that for most of high school, and I realized like, okay, what makes the officers so admirable? So, okay, so they're great speakers, they're
Sure.
great leaders, they're problem solvers, people like being around them. And so I worked on those skills. Like throughout high school, I worked really hard on those skills. I worked on my leadership, I worked on my public speaking. I really forced myself out of my comfort zone, which, to be fair, was also with the help of my teachers, because they always forced me out of my comfort zone.
Of course.
And I was really encouraged to go, like, every time I walked into a room, I made a new friend. I was super adamant about making
Very
myself
good.
get up and talk in front of people a lot, because that was something that terrified me. I was forcing myself to talk on issues that I was very scared to talk about because I was where I didn't know enough about them, and so I would just
Sure.
do research for like months at a time. And like I actually competed in a public speaking team called Extemporaneous,
I do know
where
that.
I was actually involved in speaking about agricultural issues. I spent 3 months of doing research, and then I would get involved into
my
the
gosh.
contest. And yeah, so I would have like 5 binders full of research
my
on
gosh.
research. I go into the contest, and the contest is cutthroat. It's brutal. I mean, like you
Yeah.
walk in, with your 5 binders full of research. That's all you're allowed to have.
Uh-huh.
And there's 20 cards laid out on a table. You don't know what any of them say. You get to
Mhm.
pick up 3 of them. Pick a topic from those 3, because each of the cards has a topic on it, and the topic is usually phrased into question, and it's usually a super vague question.
Of course.
You pick a topic from those 3, and then you have 30 minutes to write a speech on it. And so I learned how to think on my feet because of that. That taught
Yeah,
me to
that'll
think
do it.
very quickly. And so I had to deliver, 4 to 6 minute speeches in front of a panel of judges on issues that they're experts in, and I was definitely not.
Right.
And then they had 5 minutes to ask me questions about anything I said in the speech. And so
Ooh, so you couldn't get away scot-free by going, oh no, I guess
No.
we're out of time, guys, bye.
yeah, no, you had to be like on your toes all the time. And so that was probably what was the best thing for me, though, was it really taught me how to think on my feet, how to work and problem solve, and kind of make sure I know my stuff, or else I'm not gonna be able to speak on it. And so
Yeah.
kind of all of those things combined, plus my teachers influencing me quite a bit, and teaching me about how to be a good ag teacher and all that, and how to be a good mentor, how to be a good leader, led to me eventually graduating and studying ag education in college. And so so now I
And where
coach
do you
other
go to
teams.
college?
I go to Fresno State.
Fresno State. Excellent. They've got a good
Mhm.
ag program there, then, I assume?
Very, very good.
Oh, that's exciting. Congratulations. That's really, really exciting.
Thank
You must
you.
be in your graduation there, too, then, yeah?
Yeah, so I'm
nearing to it. Is that a scary topic? Sorry. I used to be an LSAT teacher, and I talked to a lot of just about to graduate folks. I know that can be nerve-wracking, so sorry if I brought up a tough spot.
You're fine. I've still got another year before that happens, so I'm still okay. I'm still a junior,
You're
but
still safe. You're safe.
I'm still okay. So next year, if you ask me that, I might have a breakdown, but that's in the future.
Sure. I'll
but
send you all my GRE tips. I used to teach that too.
Perfect. I'll appreciate it. But yeah, so that's my path.
Yeah. Fantastic. That is such a cool path. I am so in awe. You've really found a wonderful niche here, and I love the claim coming in swinging of that everything is related to agriculture. I could absolutely see that. Of course, I don't know nearly enough to back that up. I'm sure you will absolutely kick my butt up and down the halls with it, but I'm excited to see that too. So you've really found your niche. That is so exciting, Brendan. Congratulations.
Thank you. That really means a lot. And yeah, it's something that, I never imagined myself doing growing up, but my parents are all super supportive of it. My family and my friends are all very supportive of it. I'm kind of like the ag guy now. Everyone that has a question about ag, they go to me about it. And so that's kind of cool. But
I understand completely. I grew up, again, thinking I was going to be a marine biologist. Turns out, do not like math at all. Went through quite a few phases in my own career before I ended up heading back to entertainment, and that was a long, winding road of many, many variants.
Yep.
So you'll find like a lot of my expertise is in really like the niche of anything related to deals, contracts, or any kind of like human relation in a formal setting, right? So say you're building a network, say you're building a show, whatever it is, if it has to do with people management, it's probably something I know a bit about.
Awesome.
That is related to people only. So when you start talking plants and animals, I start looking scared. And I did tell you before, I do have a lifelong fear of large farm animals. They're just too big. I don't have any other rationale. They're just way too big. I guess I had the same misconception about pigs that my friend called me, every other city slicker had, that they're like up to like your thigh. No, they're huge. They are way too large. And then after reading enough criminal cases in law school about the disposal of bodies using pigs, I was like, oh, okay, I liked them better when they were teacup size. And this is no longer acceptable to me. So it's just gotten worse over the years. And I respect that they are, in fact, like, intelligent and all that stuff. And they can be intelligent from over there. And I'll be intelligent from over here. So that's where that's my entire relation to agriculture at the moment, is usually being the person that my friends who do know what they're talking about are like, all right, let me explain something from scratch. Amie, ask me a question. So happy to be your springboard.
Awesome. Well, yeah, that's great. And we'll be diving into all of that. I do have a lot of questions about the fear of farm animals kind of thing.
I hope I have some interesting answers.
Well, it's a question with a purpose. It's not just for the sake of teasing you for your fears, but there are some some curious things that I want to pick apart in there. And
sure.
I mean, we'll go into all the other stuff too. I definitely read over the articles that you sent me about guerrilla gardening and all that, so we'll go into that.
Sure.
I want to talk a little bit about farm ethics, because you did mention that ethics is kind of a big deal to you.
Yeah, I got a whole degree in it and everything.
Yep. So yeah, we'll go over that. I would like to pick up a little bit on like your like you mentioned you have dreams of having a greenhouse and that you like foraging and all that. So we'll go into that. I am curious about what exactly a wax jambu is. I don't know what that is. Have you heard of that?
Yeah, that's okay. So let me. I'm cheating because I know it's an audio medium, but I'm going to send you a photo. The wax jambu is a plant that is, I believe, native to Thailand, I want to say.
Okay.
And look at that. There's a California tropical trees nursery. So if you so felt inclined, it is apparently locally accessible. Well, local as in within the state of California, and that's a big spread. But
right.
You see, they're kind of pear-shaped, and they're, waxy. They look waxy, at least. They're shiny, and they're smooth to the touch. The skin of them, however, is really quite thin, like pear thin. And the flesh is, I would say, like watermelony, but with less resistance even. Like, it just kind of crumbles in your mouth. There's no core. Wow. And there's like a little bit of a tough spot where the flower, I guess, dies off at the end of the fruit. But other than that, it is exactly as it looks, in just fruit all the way through. It is extremely juicy. It tastes somewhere between like a Honeycrisp apple and like when you have like an unbelievably good pear that is just like change your life good. It's somewhere between those two. But again, with the texture of a watermelon. I have maintained for my entire life that this is the perfect fruit.
Interesting.
Because you can just eat it with no mess, no nothing, and it's still juicy, it's still flavorful. There's enough resistance so that you don't feel like you're just eating pulp, and it's gorgeous. And I have missed them so dearly. I used to live in Hong Kong where I could get them at the grocery, and I have never seen them in the States. Not ever. I have even tried purchasing my own wax jambu tree to attempt to grow in Colorado, which was hubris at its peak. But I have been tempted even to order, like, there's a Miami fruits organization that'll sell you a box of them for $99, and despite my spouse looking at me and going, please Amy, no, don't buy $99 worth of fruit, it's been a close call every summer. So one of these days I'm sure I'll cave, but that is the wax jambu in my perpetual quest to find it at some point again in my life, and I suspect it will just mean going back to Thailand.
Wow, that's awesome. I mean, I've definitely, like I said, never heard of that fruit before, but I'm constantly learning new things about a variety of different types of fruits. So I'll definitely have to keep my eye out for that one if I see it. You said that they're accessible in California, so I might be able to hook you up.
Well, the fruit tree, tropicalfruittrees.com apparently is based in California. I'm not sure if that means they actually will let you see them or what. But in theory, it's growable in like Southern California because it looks for more like a tropical environment. But I'd bet you're more likely to run into like a cherimoya, if you know what that is. It's like the sugar apple or loaf fruit, depends on the region of Asia, but it looks like a dragon egg and it tastes like ice cream. So it's also a really cool fruit. Yeah.
Interesting. I'm learning new things all the time about weird exotic fruits that just apparently taste really, really good, and yet no one ever grows. So
yes.
that's interesting.
Cherimoya, I think it's because it's got seeds in it, so you've got to spit them out. But they're like huge. They're like the size of cherries. The seeds, you can't possibly miss them. So
wow.
It's super easy, and if you chill it, it legit tastes like you're just eating ice cream. It's really
crazy.
incredible.
That's
Sometimes
awesome.
called breadfruit too. Yeah.
Huh. Okay. So I'm curious because you kind of brushed over it right there, but your first interaction was with this fruit was in, you said, Thailand?
So my first interaction with it was in Hong Kong. I lived in Hong Kong for 5 years or so, but they were way more frequent in Thailand, and I visited Thailand a few times, and they were like on the roadside, like the trees were everywhere. Whereas in Hong Kong, you'd go get them like saran wrapped in a marketplace or something like that.
Wow.
And in mainland China, they had them too. The breadfruit was actually something that was introduced to me by my friend from Guam. I had not they actually do grow in the States, and people don't recognize them as edible fruits because they look like horse apples, but they're softer. So, like, you know how the horse apple is like almost like a jackfruit, and it's just nastiness all the way down. The cherimoya kind of has a similar scaly look to it, but it's soft. So people will often mistake it as something that's just like a squishy horse apple and rotten or whatever and toss it. But you can actually find quite a few cherimoya trees, oh my gosh, I want to say papau or P-A-P-A-U. It's like the largest fruit native to North America.
Oh yeah, I've heard of that.
Yeah, they're native. They're relatives to the cherimoya. They're the undomesticated version, basically. Yeah.
Huh. Interesting.
Wow. I managed to convince a friend of mine who goes to the University of Iowa to go try the one on campus because she identified it, and she's like, "Are you certain it's edible?" I think I'm positive. So I do know they exist in the States.
Wow. Well, yeah, no. So that, for anyone who's, who has access to these fruit, make sure you go try it because you have a seal of approval that they are delicious. So
they really are. They're great. Cherimoya, breadfruit, pawpaw, I want to say. I don't remember what the Native American one was, but you might have to Google that. In fact, check me on it.
Huh. Wow. So what? I'm not sure if you touched on it or not, but what brought you out to that area that allowed you to try out these fruit in the first place?
Nothing of my own volition. I was a kid.
Oh, gotcha.
It was my father's job, and I got to tag along.
Gotcha. Okay, makes sense. I thought this was like maybe like during college or something. You like did study abroad
no. Would not be something. Here, your ethics degree, and also you can go to Asia for no particular reason. Like, oh, well, sign me up. But
that's awesome. All right, well, that crosses one thing off my list. I did want to ask about your exotic fruit taste. So perfect. That addresses that. Well, I'll save the more fun stuff for later. Let's go into the greenhouse stream. So what makes you want to have a greenhouse? Like what kind of got you into this whole idea?
So I adore picking berries. It's one of the few things that will actually get me outdoors and in nature for an extended period of time. Blackberries specifically are the love of my life, but I will make do with whatever. I like hunting down gooseberries and blueberries and all that stuff too. Wild strawberries. I just like berries. I don't know. It's just a very satisfying thing to pick berries. And they're, very seasonal. And the way to cheat seasonal is to have a greenhouse. So that's really the logic. And also, in theory, I could grow my precious wax jambu in the Cherimoya and all that if given enough leeway and, I guess, property rights to
There you
do
go.
some truly insane things with heaters that I could, in theory, grow them in places like Colorado.
Awesome. All right, well, that makes sense. I mean, I think that's kind of the motivation for a lot of people to get into greenhouse farming is, just being able to grow stuff that they normally wouldn't be able to see, or maybe they just don't have access to land, and so that's kind of, like you said, cheating the system a little bit. You get to have your cake and eat it too,
Exactly. Precisely.
Awesome.
That was something that I was fascinated with. Like the greenhouse thing led me to the what are they called? Food forests, I want to say, is what they like when you build a sustained, like, it's not greenhouse similar to it in that it's a cheat of the seasons. It's more in that you use, like, you get tree shelter to make sure that the bushes that you have are growing properly, and then the whole thing recycles itself year in year. So you can actually, like, just wait basically for your food garden to come back. Like, you don't have to replant it every year. I thought that was such a fascinating concept, since you can do it with like a backyard level of area. Granted, I have been told this by folks who have been just starting their food forest, so I don't know if they've actually succeeded. But so maybe you can, but I thought it was an interesting idea to set up basically like a real life terrarium, with the purpose of building or creating food that you prefer to eat.
Interesting. Yeah, no, to that point, everything works, or everything's a good idea at first. Then, you can kind of see over time how well it fares.
Precisely.
But no, that looks really interesting. I mean, I'm looking at pictures of it right now, and it's got some interesting attributes to it. Yeah.
Definitely. And it's meant to be entirely self-sustained is the like the idea of like a perfect food forest. I'm not sure how much I buy into that, but like I feel like at some point you have to get mulch, but
Right.
Or like, eventually you're like 2 cows and a herd of chickens down the line and going, it's for the garden. Like, okay, well, it's not just the garden now.
Yeah. No, there is this idea that's kind of older in terms of agriculture that is, that the land can sustain itself, which obviously we see that it did before, civilization came into place. But, there's a lot of agriculturalists who, I shouldn't say a lot, but there's quite a few agriculturalists who stick by that mentality of like, they don't invest much into the land. They just kind of bring, new things, like they either bring crops or animals that can kind of sustain themselves and each other, and they just kind of let them do their thing and just keep the land going. And so
fascinating.
Yeah, so I actually know some people, and the level of effectiveness of this is kind of varying. It depends on the operation. It doesn't work for everybody. Some people it does, but like there are some people who will buy some cattle, and they'll buy like some. Well, I mean, that's kind of the motivation behind the grass-fed beef theory is that if you leave them out in the pasture, then you don't have to fertilize the pasture. They'll kind of fertilize it themselves. And
okay, so then you can just kind of rotate them to make sure that you have your all right, that makes
exactly.
sense.
So they have not crop rotation. They have pasture rotation. Crop rotation is a different thing, but pasture rotation is built around that idea, and it's mostly a grass-fed operation style. You don't really see that kind of thing happen in what we call CAFOs. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with AFOs versus CAFOs, or that's kind of a newer.
Not even remotely. What are those?
Well, that's fair, because most people in agriculture aren't even familiar with that. It's kind of a newer term that's been brought into the industry.
Read me into it. This is exciting.
so an AFO or AFO is an animal feeding operation. Okay. And so a CAFO, as I'm sure you can guess, is a confined animal feeding operation.
Sure. Okay.
So basically, just to illustrate a picture of what that might look like for you is like, I'm sure you've seen, ranches or dairies where they have like they have metal fencing, and they have, like everything is structurally designed. Like there's no pasture land. It's all built around having them in pens, and they have designed feed troughs for their feed, and they have like they have pathways for them to travel from pen to pen, or from barn to barn.
Sure.
So that's considered a CAFO. So because they're confined, they're not left to the natural environment. They're in what's considered a confined animal feeding operation. An AFO would be something that's considered free range, grass fed, anything that doesn't confine them to a particular type of structure. They kind of have the ability to wander wherever they want. That's typically referred to as an AFO.
So I'm curious in terms of I know the term free range has legal and like regulatory implication, but I'm curious as to like what the agricultural definition of free range is. Like presumably there's a fence at some point, yeah? Or does like occasionally a cow just leave? Like is that like part of it, or what would you say free range is?
So it's dependent on the operation, and so some operations will have the definition can vary somewhat. I don't think there's actually like a definitive term on like when it's considered free range versus when it's not, as long as there's certain criteria that are true. If it's true that the animals can wander past a certain distance, I'm sure it's considered free range. But like usually, yes, there's some kind of fencing. You don't want your cattle to wander onto the street and get hit by a car or something.
Right. Not exactly you don't want safe for the cattle. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. You don't want your goats to wander into somebody's yard and eat their plants. But
accidental food forestry.
Right. But to what degree they consider it free range, I'm not entirely sure. If there's a point where it's like, if you have a fence 100 acres out, then it's considered free range. But if it's if it's 99, it's no longer considered free range. I don't think it's like that specific. Free range is kind of just like a general term that means they're not confined into a particular pen. Usually they're out on an open area that allows them to interact with the natural environment.
Okay, so as close to natural environment as possible. Okay, interesting.
Pretty much, yeah.
I would check out the regulations per state for that, too. I remember reading about some regulations for chickens and free range and how it had been skewed drastically from state to state. Like it was something like 5 square foot per chicken of movable space considered free range, because they are, like, the argument was that they don't move much. But they also based that off of contained chickens, right, which was kind of a strange choice. So I would be curious your thoughts on that and whether or not you would consider that free range. And I think it is a state dependent thing. So I'm not sure if there's a quotable single federal source for that.
Right, and so that's a good point too. Is that, again, it's gonna vary, on the regulatory basis from state to state as well. And so there's you'll find with agriculture, a lot of terminology is variable on a lot of different things. It's not necessarily like most terms have some kind of level of concrete meaning, but they can be skewed a little bit. So that's why agriculture is a difficult industry to work in, is because not everything means the same thing from operation to operation. And so, I mean, like, you hear the word sustainability thrown around quite a bit. Sustainability means a lot of different things. And so it's hard to define. Right. So, I mean, and that's kind of the issue, is that, there's a lot of terms to remember, and not all of them mean the same thing in every context.
Correct.
So
that makes sense.
Addressing that point from the free range perspective, most of the time it does refer to the amount of acreage per head is that's what considers it free range.
Okay, got it.
That's kind of like the defining term, but it varies from, like I said, it varies from state to state, and it varies from operation to operation. And so you might have, let's just say you have a backyard that's fairly significant in size. If you have a 10-acre backyard, and you have 2 chickens out there, technically they're considered free range chickens. But that but that same if you have that same amount of land and you add 3 more chickens, all of a sudden it's not free range anymore. So it's not the land that makes them free range, it's the amount of space that they have to interact with the land. And so that's where the terms start to get a little bit hard to draw. Like, the lines are hard to draw. And so I can't remember what exactly the requirements are for California. I know for cattle it's like, I think it's 1 to 2 acres per head. That's cow and calf. Oh, wow. So it's significantly less.
But that's still, I mean, that adds up if you have a huge herd of cattle. Granted, I grew up in cities, and acre is huge to me, so
right,
it's more than 10 foot by 10 foot. I'm already like, oh wow, that's too much. So
right. So yeah, but that
Okay.
also depends on the operation. I think that in other states, I think that's just in California as well. So like in other states, it might be, a cow gets 5 acres to itself, or it might get, half an acre to itself. Like it kind of just, it's hard to say like, oh yeah, this is exactly what it means, because it might mean something different where you're at. And in other countries, they have way different regulations. I mean, like my, I have a family that goes to Portugal all the time to, to visit like with their family. And they have, cattle and livestock just walking through the middle of the road. Like, and they don't even have fences. They just kind of let them wander.
I was gonna say, that's the freest of range.
Like, right.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, they've unlocked ultimate free range. And so, like, that's kind of like, it's hard to, harder to determine exactly where the lines are for this stuff, just because it can vary so much.
Sure. That makes sense. That's fascinating. Okay, yeah. So I guess my follow-up question on that is that a lot of these, the ag terms got kind of stolen into popular culture in terms of like free range, organic, sustainable, all that stuff. Like you said, and I wholeheartedly agree, those mean wildly different things depending on context. And I had a friend explain to me once why organic was probably actually not what you thought it was, and I cannot remember the details, but something about like not even being able to offer certain antibiotics or whatever, and that meant that the life and quality of life of the animal might actually be extremely terrible, whereas you're thinking that organic, you in your mind are seeing like cows prancing through green pastures or whatever. I don't know what cows do, but you're picturing happy, like the whole point of it is to encourage happy farming and happy animals and all that stuff, but it seems to be directly misaligned with how that's been branded by folks like, I guess, distributors, so the not farmers of the equation, who take the aforementioned prancing cows and synthesize that into the word organic and slap that a label on. So what are your thoughts about that, and how that has impacted how people shop and pick their products and all that stuff?
That's a really, really good question. And it's a really important conversation that I think isn't had enough. And that's that, there's a lot of, like you mentioned, there's a lot of terms, there's a lot of labels that are thrown around that relate to agriculture, but nobody really knows what they mean or in what ways that is reflected in the agriculture industry. So they hear organic, or, they hear grass-fed, or they hear, like all these other terms that they see labels for, antibiotic-free, pesticide-free, and they think, oh yeah, that was raised on a, on a farm that's doing it right. A farm that's healthy, and they're doing great.
See the
when in reality,
and all that,
right, like when in reality, that farm might be, they might have animals that are struggling to make it through the next day because they can't give them antibiotics. And so it kind of, there's some truth, and there's some myth to everything that's said about those terms, on both sides. And so I will say, in terms of the organic side of things, so like you mentioned that, in organic operations, they can't give, they can't administer antibiotics to animals if they're sick. That's true to a degree. So
it's specific antibiotics, right?
Right. It's specific, it's dosage, and it's not always the case that doesn't always mean that animal's going to die if it doesn't get that antibiotic.
Sure.
What typically will happen is that, you have a lot of organic farmers, and this is actually a common misconception. Just because somebody sells product that goes on to be marketed as organic doesn't mean they're an organic farmer exclusively.
Interesting.
You have actually a lot of farmers that choose to run both. So they'll have like an organic operation down the road, and then the other direction they have a conventional operation. And so,
what would be the benefit of doing that?
So mostly it's for financial gain, because there's really not much difference in terms of like I shouldn't say there is a significant difference in terms of the financial investment, but you do get a solid premium for having organic products, and so because people will pay for it, it's literally no difference in terms of health benefits, but people will pay for it, and therefore it gets you more money. So you'll have farmers, people like to think like the organic farmer's like this super great guy who would never dare put any chemicals on their crops or anything, or give antibiotics to their animals. When really it's the same guy that's doing that, he's just doing it down the road so you can't see him. Like,
got it. It is organic Fred, not synthetic Fred. He's that way.
Right. Yeah, so it's the same guy. He's just wearing a fake mustache, and he's selling you a different product. But that's not to say like agriculture is not trying to be deceitful in that way. It's just that the consumers haven't taken the time to figure that out. Like it's literally like, and this isn't to say like the people who, do that are bad people or anything. I actually know some people that do that. They're really good people. It's just that, if they can make some extra money for their family, they're going to do it.
Yeah.
And so it's funny to me whenever people have the whole like, idea in their head that like, oh yeah, I bought this from an organic farmer.
Organic farms. And like,
right.
Okay, all right.
So what'll typically happen is, like, let's just say you have a farmer who raises organic beef, and he raises conventional beef, and the operations are like around the street from each other.
Okay.
If he has an organic herd, and let's just say one of the calves gets sick, he can watch that calf for a few days, and if he feels like the calf isn't going to survive without the antibiotics, he can administer the antibiotics, but now that calf is taken out of that herd and put in the other herd.
Gotcha. So when you can't cut it with the organic herd, they basically just walk you down the street to where the antibiotics are. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's actually to the benefit of the animals and crops as well, presumably. That you have that fallback. Okay, cool.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So the entire idea behind it is not to allow the animals to suffer, because the number one priority of an animal, somebody who focuses on animal husbandry, is to maintain the health and well-being of that animal. Basically, like, the common like catchphrase of dairymen, at least where I'm from, is that dairymen, their entire job isn't to make milk, it's to make happy cows, and the happy cows make milk.
Right.
And so that mentality, is something that kind of, I think, should be pushed a lot more in the organic market, is that, organic cows, organic cows who get sick don't die. They just go and become non-organic cows.
Right. And there's not a significant like drop in quality or happiness or whatever. It's an entirely different setup. Interesting. That's fascinating. Yeah, that's exactly what I was curious about, because I was thinking, surely it is not to the benefit of the farmer either to have, like, the horror images that get pumped around about, like, this cow has exactly 1 square foot, and they're balancing on one toe, and they're sad and crying every day. Like surely that can't actually be helpful.
No. And you'll find that, the deeper you go into the idea of, like, farmers not taking care of their animals or their crops, the more you'll start to realize that that's actually hurting them more in the long run than it is anybody else.
Yeah, because surely then, talk about sustainability. Like, it's not exactly keep up.
Right. Yeah. No, there's a lot of people out there that like to try to convince you that farmers don't like to take care of their animals because it costs them more money. No, it costs them more money to not take care of their animals. If they have a sick animal and that animal dies, they lost a lot more money than they would have just putting some more medicine into that animal to make sure it doesn't die.
Right.
So. Right. And not only that,
your livelihood is the animal. It would be very weird to have your livelihood in terrible condition. That seems like a poor choice.
Right, exactly. No, and not just that. Like I mentioned with the dairymen, their purpose is to produce happy cows, and that's not just a PR stunt. It's not just to make people feel good about drinking milk from happy cows. There's literally a correlation between product and stress levels on the producer. So. If you have cows that are stressed out, they're not going to produce as much milk, and their milk isn't going to taste as good. So you really want to make sure that they're happy and low stress as much as possible. That way they produce the highest quality milk you can, and you can get the most money out of it.
That is okay. So that's I'm going to have to go look up some articles for that and share them with my spouse and housemate, because like my husband and I, we started a company last September called Faustian Nonsense, where essentially we've both followed our lifelong goal of zero compromise in our creative endeavors, meaning that if you have an unhappy creator, the creation that you get is going to suck. Mm-hmm. Having an artist who is overworked, underpaid, does not like the subject matter, and is doing this to make rent, they're going to make you something that barely passes versus something that they adore painting. They're going to spend hours and hours on, and it's going to be something that they clearly poured love into and their soul into and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. Same with, and we're currently focusing on podcasts. But podcast creators, you can tell somebody who's like, I think this is going to be a hit idea. I don't love it, but I think it's going to be a hit. Like, all right, well then you shouldn't be the one who's making it. It's great to pitch the idea to somebody else, but it's going to be a lot more sustainable if it's somebody who can pour in the heart and soul to actually bring it to life. So that is fascinating that is reflected in agriculture in the sense of like the happy cow produces the most and best milk. I'm going to have to reiterate that, much to the confusion, I'm sure, of the other FN employees of, don't worry, we're aiming for happy cows, guys. And I'm like, that's a weird comment from you, Amy, but okay. So that's
exactly.
Fantastic.
And that, I mean, that's true across all platforms. I mean, that's not just like you mentioned, a content creator that doesn't love what they're doing or is stressed out by the amount of work they have on their plate is going to produce less, like lower quality products overall.
Absolutely.
The same goes for everything. I mean, it doesn't matter what industry you're talking about, and especially in agriculture. And it's even more so because like cows don't have the ability to work on their mental health. Like they don't really have like like there's like
That's very
right
true, though.
like you don't see cows meditating off in the pastures. Usually like they just kind of do their thing, and if they get stressed out, then you're kind of you're up a creek at that point. You really can't do anything about it. So
sure,
the whole the whole purpose is to, and that goes for dairy cows that produce milk, that goes for animals that are going to be used for meat products, that goes for
sure.
egg laying chickens, anything that's going to produce a product that is going to be consumed by a person. You're going to want that animal as happy and as stress-free as possible, because there's actually a phenomenon in the meat industry known as dark cutters. And I don't know if you've ever heard of this term.
I have not. What is that?
So a dark cutter, it's another somewhat, kind of relatively new term, but we've also kind of known about it for a while. It's complicated.
Okay.
So dark cutters are animals that whenever you put them through processing, so after they've gone through their entire lifespan and we decide to turn them into meat products, they cut really, really, really dark red. And so what that means is, like let's just say we take a pig, for example, and we're going to try to make a pork chop out of it, and or like pig loin, pork loins, or whatever you're trying to make out of it. If you make that cut, because in the meat industry we determine quality by cutting the ribeye, and so we look at the size of the ribeye, and that kind of tells us how good the meat's going to be. If they make the cut in the ribeye to grade it, and they see that cut is extremely dark red, because like pork is almost considered a white meat. It's a very, very light pink, and it's almost considered white. And so if pork is like that dark of a red, that is not good. Like that's like seriously, seriously bad. So a dark cutter is an animal who was so stressed out that their meat is now nearly toxic for people to eat. Like even if you so even if you cook it, you can't cook it out of them, you can't prepare it properly. Like no matter what you do, if the meat is stressed enough, it becomes completely inedible for humans and actually can make them sick. And so
that is remarkable.
Yeah. And so if that's not an argument for farmers trying to keep their animals as happy as possible, I don't know what is.
Right. It's literally inedible. Oh my gosh. Okay, so even from like ethics put aside, which obviously I care plenty about, but often folks will listen much more to their bank than to their ethicists.
Right.
That's a hell of an argument for the bank. Is you literally cannot make money off of this if you cannot keep your animal happy. Fascinating. Right. Okay.
So if you go from the biological, from the ethical, from the financial, from the economic, no matter what perspective you look at it, animals being stressed out backfires on the farmer tenfold. So you really want to make sure, if you're involved in agriculture, that the number one priority is taking care of your animals. Same goes for crops. If you stress out crops, they'll produce poor product if they produce anything at all. Sometimes they'll just skip a year of producing fruit if they're too stressed. So like making sure that you keep whatever it is you're trying to cultivate as healthy and as happy as possible is your number one goal, no matter what.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay, then what are your thoughts on, I've heard like all sorts of horror stories from like articles I've read for ethics classes, from, knowing other ethicists that will send me other crazy articles and that I don't know nearly enough about to make a judgment call on. But I have a hunch that there is something mirrored in just about every industry where there are big conglomerates that do some pretty heinous stuff because they can afford to do so, right? Like the cost of tenfold is something they can afford to do. Is that something that does occur in larger, like, what's the one that gets all the crap thrown at it? Tyson, I think?
Oh, Tyson's a big one. Monsanto's kind of one of those in terms of GMOs.
Yes.
There's all kinds of stuff on that.
Is it because they can afford that tenfold penalty for the poor agriculture practice?
Yeah, so it's kind of...
I'm sure it's complicated.
It is.
Okay.
This goes with everything. There's going to be a certain level of complexity with it. With agriculture, as agriculture at the end of the day is an industry, and with any industry, there's going to be hierarchies of power, determined by people who are very, very good at that industry, you know?
Sure.
And so when you have corporate conglomerates like that, there tends to be levels of corruption involved, and that goes across all industries. And so at the end of the day, you know, there needs to be a statement made about the fact that yes, there are, you know, there are even small farmers out there that are bad at their practice, and whether they do it intentionally or not, you know, sometimes their, you know, their animals or their crops or their operation suffer from it. And so, like, that's not to say that, you know, like they're like they're let's see, how do I want to word this? Like you see like the videos all the time of like farmers like, you know, mistreating animals or like, you know, unhealthy and like unsanitary conditions and that kind of stuff.
Sure.
That stuff does happen. You know, it's not to say it doesn't. It's not to say every farmer's perfect. Like there's definitely going to be instances of that kind of stuff happening. We try to prevent it as much as possible. And anytime we see that, you know, people who are on the right side of the agricultural spectrum try to really make sure that we like let people know we don't support that. You know, like if we see a farmer abusing their animals and we or you know, like mistreating their operation or even abusing workers, you know, we make sure that we say, hey, that's not okay. We don't do that. We don't condone any of that kind of behavior. Don't associate him with us. And so that's kind of just like a covering our backs kind of thing. So on that note, you will see that on the corporate level, just because it's difficult to get away from that, you know, because it's you know, it's corporate. But the important thing to keep in mind,
people who are about as ignorant as I am making business decisions about agriculture, right? Saying like, well, that's a few thousand cattle lost to disease or whatever. And the answer is quite a bit, actually. But is that about right? Would you say that there's a lot of like, I guess what did I call it before? Out of touch management, where it's something that I've studied before as an ethicist, is that it ultimately ends up in the collapse of whatever that corporate conglomerate is, because it's not sustainable. Like if, say, for example, you fire all of your workers and replace them with folks who are overworked, underpaid, undertrained, and all that stuff, the quality diminishes, people stop buying the product or service, and you have now lost way more money than you could have gained by treating your people as assets. I am guessing there's something similar to that in agriculture, in the sense of like, these poor practices are ultimately going to bite them in the butt eventually, even if they have a huge head start as a corporate conglomerate.
Yes, no, exactly. You hit the nail right on the head with that. That's exactly what is going on. You know, you have a lot of instances where, like, because more often than not, if somebody's running a you know, an agriculturally based corporation and they know agriculture, they try to avoid making those mistakes because they understand the ramifications of them. It's when you have people coming in that have no experience in agriculture, or, you know, they have very little, or the experience they do have isn't with, you know, working with the actual workers or the animals. It's more in like the financial part of it, that they start to make decisions that have negative ramifications on the operation. So like, just to give an example like this, and this isn't an example of somebody who's doing it wrong, but this is an example of somebody who's disconnected from agriculture running an agricultural corporation. Have you ever heard of Wonderful?
The word, or
well, it's a company. So you have like Wonderful Orchards, Wonderful Pistachios, Wonderful, you know, almonds, all that kind of stuff.
I'll look for them next time I'm in the store.
So yeah, Wonderful is a massive, just like huge agricultural corporation that is based around mostly trees. So they have like, you know, Wonderful Citrus, they have Wonderful Pistachios, they have Wonderful Pomegranates. Like they have all kinds of different, you know, tree-based fruit and, you know, fruit and nuts basically. And they, like, their main CEO, like the head of heads, you know, the most important guy, you know, he's from LA. He knows absolutely nothing about agriculture. Like never been near agriculture.
Big
like
old red
knows
flag.
Nothing about it. Right. So actually, you know, surprisingly, he's been, you know, running the corporation incredibly well. Like
That's
Wonderful has been reported as one of the best agricultural corporations to work for, and like they take very, very good care of their workers, which is awesome. But that's an example of, you know, a massive disconnection between the higher ups and the actual agricultural work. So again, you know, that's an example of, again, this is somebody who is doing it right, but somebody who decides to not go in that direction.
It would still be better to have somebody who does have an agricultural background, you know?
Right. So that would be the idea.
Interesting. Okay. So, I mean, I guess then the ultimate, like, because I see all sorts of different theorems of, like, what the best thing you can do to support farmers is or whatever. I guess the best thing you could do would be to support farmers' voices, to say, like, actually, no, you should listen to the person who's raising these animals and crops over Mr. Executive from LA, who might very well try to honor that, but doesn't have the resume needed in order to control this at a much larger level and understand the intricacy of it.
Yes. And so that's kind of our biggest call to action, is that, you know, not that you should, you know, like, that's not to say completely discredit everything that somebody running those types of corporations is saying, but be sure to listen to the farmer side of it too, because the farmers are actually working with it. They know, you know?
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Okay, that's fascinating. Then are there any movement? I suppose FFA would be a big movement for like educating farmers so that they can build up to that executive level and have that sort of influence, rather than say the big scary Tyson Monsantos and that lot.
Right. And so that's actually an interesting point, because FFA is that's a common misconception with the organization, is that it's built for, you know, young people in agriculture to get further. What FFA's entire purpose is to try to get people who aren't even involved in agriculture into the industry.
Oh, that's fascinating. Okay.
And not just get them involved like in the industry in terms of make them farmers, but make them aware of how deeply agriculture ties into everything. Because
so that
there's
way you
a
can
lot
spot that organic
sorry.
label and go, I don't know about that, and see the,
Exactly.
the grass-fed and go, okay, but is this grass-fed Fred with the fake mustache, or is this how does that mean? Like,
right.
Okay, got it.
Yeah. So it's, you know, the entire purpose of the organization is to have better conversations and to have better education for people not involved in agriculture, and even more specifically to help people who aren't planning on going into agriculture still have awareness of it. And so that's kind of, I mean, I'm a product of FFA, obviously, and I went into it without much knowledge and much really interest in agriculture, and I came out of it running a whole podcast about it. And so
I'd say they sufficiently got your interest, at least.
Yeah, that's a fair statement. And you know, one of the things we try to focus on in FFA is, you know, show people that agriculture is way more than just farming. I mean, agriculture can explain, as you listen to my tech episode, there's a lot of involvement in agriculture that has to do with robotics and artificial intelligence and computer science and drone technology and even like lawmaking, you know, and legislation.
Oh, absolutely. I remember studying about the John Deere cases and the absolute nonsense they pull over on farmers by saying that you purchase the license to use it, but the tractor is not actually yours. And that was an eye-opening class. I suddenly understood why there are hundreds and hundreds of tractors in the roadside that nobody can touch, because John Deere has said, by the way, you never actually purchased it, and leaving people in unbelievable amounts of debt. So that was wild to learn about. I was really glad that you touched on that too, of like, yeah, we have actually all these advances, the problem being
right.
Yeah, cool. So I bet that would be a big reason for agriculturalists to join forces with like the open source movement and the 3D printer movements and the stuff of like, okay, well, we don't actually need you, John Deere, John not so dear.
Right.
We can make our own bits and pieces. So I wonder how much of an intersection there is between that and the huge surge of tech startup and all the good and horrible that comes with it.
Yeah, so there's actually quite a bit of involvement with agriculture in newer technologies. As obviously we have like artificial intelligence and we have drone technology and that kind of stuff, and Absolutely. Precision agriculture is a huge new thing coming into the arena. But there's actually, so in my hometown Tulare, as we talked about, which I still need to figure out where you've heard of us, but in my hometown we have what's called the World Ag Expo, and every year it's this massive exposition where it's basically a kind of like a trade show, but there's people that come from like tons and tons of different countries. Like I've met people from Germany, from France, from Sweden, from like Japan, from Australia, from all over the place. And they all come to my little hometown because we have this massive show where companies, both agricultural and non, can show off new technology that they're creating that can benefit the agriculture industry. And
okay, that's fascinating.
Like you wouldn't believe the kind of stuff that I've seen at some of these shows, and I've done videos on all of them on my YouTube channel. Like every year they ask me to come back and do videos on them, and so I've been able to do that. So
that's so fun.
It's awesome. I call it Farmer Disneyland essentially. Like
I love that.
There's some awesome stuff in there, and so that being said, as you mentioned, like with the 3D printing technology, and even there's like newer technologies developing with like at some of those shows they use virtual reality to give tours of their farms and to show off some of the stuff that they're building. And so like literally like when you think of like a tech trade show but farmers, like that's basically what you're dealing with here. And so that kind of gives a glimpse as to how in depth and how deeply tied to more modern technology agriculture is. Sure. And it kind of brings a lot of hope for the future of what agriculture can really do. And so the idea is that, with advancements in technology, we could, like you mentioned, do things like, produce our own tractor parts, or,
Right.
produce things that would allow us to become more self-sufficient, if I could speak, and and not have to rely on a bunch of different companies to loan us things, because that's one of the biggest concerns in agriculture, is having to, basically sell your soul to be able to do what you want to do.
Yeah. Ain't that the truth? Capitalism comes to bite us all. Especially, man, John Deere. That was rough. Listener, if you haven't read those cases before, do so. Oh my God.
I've heard of them. They're not, I'm not super familiar with them, but I did hear
man.
about them, a while ago.
There was a case in particular for, I believe it was a combine harvester. I want to say, I might be wholly making that term up, so you'll have to triple check. But the blades of it or something were rusting and needed to be changed, or something to that effect. And so the farmer in question did so, and John Deere sued for repossession of the now fixed combine harvester in near mint condition, thanks to the farmer, saying that the farmer had violated the terms and service of use, and they got back a fully functional brand new combine harvester that they could sell back to, guess who? Same guy. So he essentially bought his own combine harvester again after fixing it. It was unbelievable that they managed to pull that off, and it basically stemmed from IP, where they said, okay, but the combine harvester is programmed, and because it's programmed to have certain whatevers, messing with it is incredibly dangerous, and you could really hurt yourself. To which the farmer said, yeah, that's why I called y'all like 50 times and no one ever picked up, and I have to harvest at some point, y'all. So like at some point it was more practical for me to just say, well, I have a blade. I can just put it in and call it a day. And the terms and service was so extensive and specific about that basically the court had to rule in favor of John Deere, saying that, well, you did sign something saying that you would never alter it, and for commercial gain, which of course a farmer who sells their product anytime they use a tractor or combine harvester or whatever else, that is for commercial gain. Was the argument. So it was just brutal. It was one of the first cases my IP professor showed us to be like, hey, so the concept of protecting intellectual property is noble and all, but here's how it can backfire.
Wow, that's crazy. I hadn't heard of that.
Isn't it? And he basically went bankrupt because of that. And it was just wild to read that and see like what the actual motivation was. And the motivation, of course, from John Deere was to make more money, since they sold a wonderful machine and could only sell it once. Poor babies.
Right.
So they had to come up with a way to sell it again. And that's where like a lot of planned obsolescence comes in and everything.
Right. Yeah, no, John Deere's going to be in trouble over the next few years, but no, it's just
fingers crossed.
Yeah. No, I mean, you hear stories about that kind of stuff happening a lot in the ag industry, and that's mostly because, a lot of people don't realize that they can go into, ag law or, lobbying, or, there's a lot of different types of agriculture that aren't farming based. And so like, there's been lawsuits recently about, or this was a few years ago now, but like when drone technology first became more common in agriculture, there was a lot of privacy issues. People were like flying their drones over their fields, and like if they saw into like sometimes they would do it unintentionally, sometimes they would do it completely intentionally. They would fly over onto their neighbors' land, and then they would look at what they were doing. Neighbors would shoot down the drone with a shotgun.
Man. Can you imagine seeing that on the feed? Like, oh, well.
Oh, man.
There goes that.
I can imagine they had a good laugh, but yeah, no, as you can imagine, lawsuits ensued, and as I'm sure stuff happens, but so like that was an example of what you would consider like an agricultural like law issue going on, like you mentioned with the tractor situation. Like there was a pest control or not pest control, a crop sprayer, like a crop duster, that I actually knew. He was from Hanford, I think. He was kind of from like near my hometown, and he was flying in his plane over to go dust some fields, and just flying over some property that he wasn't even dusting at, somebody actually shot at his plane because they didn't like that he was flying near their property. He had nothing to do with the property. He wasn't dusting them. He wasn't anywhere near them.
Is such a big deal, though. Oh
right.
My gosh.
And so like that kind of stuff, like there was a huge lawsuit for that. It was on the news. Like that was one of the few times that crop dusters have ever gotten on local news, and so that was kind of a big deal.
It's otherwise a pretty self-contained bubble bag, I'm sure. Yeah. Wow.
Oh yeah. And so like that kind of stuff, like right now, legislators in California are fighting for water rights for farmers, and so that's a huge hot topic right now.
I'm
so
sure.
like ag laws,
Nestle into playing nice.
Oh yeah, no, there's.
I'm sure you have plenty of feelings about Nestle. Oh my gosh, yeah, okay.
But yeah, so there's a lot to say in that department.
To offer a lighter avenue of drone information and stuff, since it's usually tied with so many questionable things, like inevitably it starts with like you can see your flowers from afar, and like somehow now we're killing people. Oh my god, that was a quick escalation. But there was a Ren fair somebody brought a drone to, and somebody took it down with a spear just instinctively, and they came up to the person, they apologized, they're like, I will buy you a new one, I am so sorry, I have no idea why I did that. And the person who owned the drone was like, actually, that was one of the most badass things I've ever seen. Do you want to make an event out of it? We'll call it Taking Down Dragons. So now
that's awesome.
I don't remember the state, but there's a Ren fair where people will bring their drones and try to train them so that they are like impossible to take down, and people with spears and crossbows will do their best to take them down. So that's probably one of my most favorite intersections of modern and ancient culture.
That's so cool.
Is that not the most cool thing you've ever heard? So that's what I thought of when you said shooting down the drone. It's like, oh, there's a guy at a Ren fair somewhere with a stick who can really bring his point home.
That's awesome. That's even cooler than I found out about drone racing recently. That was like one of the coolest things I ever heard of with drones. That wild? Beats it by far.
I know. Imagine being able to hire your very own spearmen to protect your farm perimeter.
See, now that would be an interesting ag job. Like,
right? Dave the local Viking. We'll bring him into...
It's just another guy in the same mustache.
Exactly. Yeah, he's got both the farms down the street and the spear farm, which is, much more difficult than you'd think. Well, that's fascinating. Right. I didn't realize how much of an intersection between, I don't know, you called it organic and I guess non-organic would be or standard?
Conventional.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I didn't realize how much that intersected and how they supported each other. That's really fascinating. So thank you for teaching me about that.
Of course. So there were a couple more things on the list that I wanted to
your
get
hometown,
to.
Right?
Well, that yes, I do want to know where how you know about Tulare, because we're not the most well known city in California.
It's true. So all right. I will forewarn now that there's spoilers for the podcast that is yet to be released, so I feel justified enough in talking about it. But if you ever so happen to go follow Faustian Nonsense in our original production, Jack of All Trades, I'm warning you now, plug your ears. I don't have a way of warning you when it's done. You'll just have to trust me. The main character, Jack, grew up in a town in the middle of nowhere, Southern California. And the reason it was chosen to be in the middle of nowhere and relatively small was that it was supposed to be a fake town. They kind of Truman showed her, and she's not actually what she thinks she is, and her parents, her adoptive parents, her entire community are in fact witches, and they literally constructed the town for the purposes of raising her. So when she ran away, whoop, up and gone. They were gone forever. So we were trying to find small towns in Southern California that could potentially be run by witches. So Tulare was on the list. If you are ever wondering.
Oh man.
You want to go real deep sea conspiracy. But it was on, we ended up making up one for on our own. We called it Covana, like coven. But Tulare, we were considering it, and then my co-writer and housemate Jack was like, maybe we shouldn't do that with a real town. Which made a solid point.
That's awesome. If it came out that my town was run by witches, I wouldn't be entirely surprised.
Honestly, it might be a great thing. It's like, okay, so the cows are like super happy because of witchcraft. Nice. All right. That's awesome.
Hey, if it supports local farmers, then I'm all for it.
Precisely. And they are good witches. They're kind. So it's right. All good things from here. You heard it here first. Exactly. So it's hilarious fake.
That's awesome.
That's how I know Tulare.
Good to know. Well, I actually found out there are actually Tulares in other states that I'm always surprised to find out about. And so I was actually born and raised in a smaller town called Tipton, which is really right next to Tulare.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a Texas Tipton, or there's a Tipton in Texas.
Okay.
And there's like a Tulare in, I think, Kentucky or something like that. Like there's
gosh.
like little, like, you know, like it's always weird hearing like your own town in another state. Because it's like, oh, like I've never met somebody from there, but I just imagine I meet somebody and they're from Tulare, and there's like, hey, I'm from Tulare. I'm like, no way, me too. What high school did you go to? And there's like from a completely different state.
Yep. My spouse is from a teeny tiny town in Arkansas called Conway, and it is of the exact same style where if you also are from Conway, you know each other. It's small enough where that is almost a guarantee. And so we were very surprised to find out there's a Conway, New Hampshire.
Oh.
So we're waiting for the exact same occurrence of, where are you from? Conway. Like, oh. Which
That's awesome. Cool.
So what other questions do you have for me?
I have two more things on the list, and I know one of them you were really excited to talk about, so let's get into the guerrilla gardening first.
Yes, I just think this is a fascinating concept, and I, of course, am all for, I'm sure it's apparent now that I have many, many opinions about ethics and things to help people, and I love the concept of creating food for folks that usually it's targeted at homeless populations. I guess I should probably start by explaining what guerrilla gardening is. So, listener, guerrilla gardening is the act of gardening on land that the gardeners do not have legal rights to cultivate. That is the basic concept of it. Now, this can be taken in terms of somebody cultivating a flower garden to make a neighborhood seem nicer, raise the price value, and thus essentially enrich the people who live there. If this is something that can be both used for good and for bad, so like say you're trying to gentrify a neighborhood, that is a sneaky way to go about it. And then you can price people out of their homes. Or you can say, like, now that they can sell their home for more, you've essentially given them a much higher value property. So there's a billion different ways of looking at it. One of the more common ones is planting food crops. So that homeless folks or folks that are constantly on the move, so like truckers who don't really have a whole lot of time to stop and go grocery shopping, for example, might be able to just pick an apple or a tomato or whatever, have some actual fresh produce that is available publicly in a city. These are often targeted towards places like Manhattan, LA, lots of California-based ones, it looked like when I was rereading through all this stuff. And it's had some spread over in Europe as well. But the big pushback on the food crops and the aesthetic flowers come from two entirely different sources. And this is what I was curious to hear your idea of, because it's something like cultivating food crops and cultivating specific like environments with your crops. It's not something that I know enough about to really state myself as for or against. But the legal argument against it would be that if you don't have any control over the quality of the crop that you're producing, you could potentially be distributing diseased apples or, pulling in an invasive species of wasps or hornets that now is going to terrorize the local populace. Essentially, you don't know what you're doing, and the health and safety that you're violating is actually of the people who live there. Same with the idea that somebody planted like in a redwood somewhere that obviously uprooted everything around it. It was incredibly destructive. Now, thankfully, the guerrilla gardener, well, I guess thankfully in quotes, the guerrilla gardener's intention was to cause destruction. I think they put it by like a towing parking lot or something, but the destruction was immense and it made the land ultimately unusable. They didn't find the person who did it, but it was still like, it was clearly somebody had gotten like a redwood sapling and planted it. It wasn't something that could have happened by accident. So there's definitely some serious consequences that can come from this, and that's like the legal aspect of it. The other aspect is botanists saying you are introducing plants and plant species outside of their native environments or altering this landscape in a way that you cannot predict. For example, there are medians all over Boulder, Colorado, where I live, that are just overrun with prairie dogs. And they are protected species because they're endangered and they only live in prairie, which is, I'm sure as you know, extremely, extremely rare. We've pretty much destroyed prairie lands in the U.S. And so anywhere that prairie dogs make residence becomes protected ground. Now, say you grab one of those seed bombs that's full of wildflowers. Your intentions are good, but you've now caused the soil to loosen, which means that prairie dogs can't burrow, which means you have possibly endangered their species more. So the idea behind beautifying it or whatever might have been well-intentioned, but the consequence there could be quite severe. So my question to you was, do you think this is something that could potentially be a responsible practice for the average everyday person? Or do you think that it's too risky? Like, what would your takeaway of this be?
So I was very interested in the topic when you presented it to me. I had never heard of guerrilla gardening before, and so I decided to do a bit of my own research on top of what you sent me. And it seems like a really interesting idea, and it's actually related to something that we're actually working on, in terms of like the ag issues addressing, department. We're trying to figure out ways to adapt agriculture to an urban setting and almost like kind of blend the two, because we're running into a risk now where urban development might actually take over all of the agricultural land over the next 30 years. Sure. And we really can't afford that, because over the next 30 years, our population is going to go up by another 2 billion people. Sure. And we're going to have to double our food production, maybe even, more than double it. And that's going to be hard to do if you don't have a whole lot of land to do it. So we're looking on ways to see if we can not only convert agriculture to adapt to the urban development, but also find ways to get the urban dwellers to be more agriculturally conscious and help help welcome agriculture with open arms. And so that requires a few different things to happen. So in terms of the guerrilla gardening, to the point that you mentioned about the cons, one of the primary issues that could come with this is, let's just say somebody tries to grow some some food that could be used like either in a local like food bank, or for homeless people, or even for local residents.
That was not poison apples. Sorry, lettuce was the example given, because if you have heavy metals in the water, the lettuce could actually be toxic. Yeah?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. So that is one of the potential hazards. But one of the hazards I was going to go with was, let's just say you have somebody who's taking care of these crops and you want to be able to feed a population with them. If there's any disease or pests, you can't spray it, because there are I guess it would depend on like the size of the operation, but there are regulations on what pesticides you can use in urban areas, and what to what capacity you can use them without it becoming a hazard for those around you. And so so and basically you're running the risk.
Who's like breaking the regulation law anyway is going to go, you're not my dad, and go buy the pesticide, and then now you've poisoned the whole town. Like, there actually might be a reason behind it. Yeah, okay. Got it.
Right. Yeah, so if there's, and not to mention that, but there could be potential pesticide residue left in the soil, which could then contaminate the water supply. And then you have issues with, like, there's all kinds of factors that need to be considered here. So on the con side, the cons can get really, really bad. Okay. The pros can be good as long as they're handled in the right way. So like I mentioned, agricultural, basically the merging of agriculture and urban life is something that I think is going to happen eventually anyways.
Sure.
So experiments we can run to try to see how it could work are always beneficial, I think, as long as they're not done in a way that could potentially, endanger anyone else.
Keeping it small scale. Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah, and so there was actually an attempt to work on a project called Pegasus. It's supposed to take place in Chicago, and they're supposed to build a 100-acre farm right smack dab in the middle of Chicago.
Okay.
And I don't know what the final status on it was. I don't think it ever got approved, but I think it was kind of something that was, in development.
Sure.
And the idea behind it was to try to get inner city kids and like more urban developing like especially like lower class or urban developed like homes to basically volunteer their time and like their energy, maybe even get paid for it, to go to this local urban farm and try to teach them about how agriculture works and where the food comes from and all that kind of stuff.
Sure.
Now, it wouldn't be commercial, it wouldn't be able to feed the entire city of Chicago, but that wasn't the idea. It wasn't supposed to produce enough food to, to be financially stable. It was supposed to be educational and, help expose them to agriculture.
Program,
right.
Rather than a subsidied program.
Right, exactly. Okay. And so with that kind of purpose, I think that there's a lot of potential for it. So using guerrilla gardens to for educational purposes, I think it can be extremely useful. Using it to feed populations, I think there's still some we're going to need some time to kind of develop a way that could be done safely and effectively.
Sure. That makes sense. Okay. So that can kind of be, and I know this is, I know I keep going back to politics. I'm betraying my roots as an attorney. Sorry to the listeners who are trying to avoid it.
No,
I promise
fine.
I'll keep it late. But this could, there's a huge disparity between rural and city dwellers in terms of shared culture, shared communication points, and it has turned into an awful lot of hostility based off of like information deserts, food deserts, all sorts of stuff, and just flat out not understanding what everybody else is doing. And so like teaching other people what organic means, or what actually means to be an agriculturalist, I think that is absolutely one of the first things we need to do in order to be able to actually communicate and help each other. But that could almost be like a wink, wink, nudge, nudge political action between the two. Yeah, like saying,
right? Yes, no, exactly.
Here's Farmer John saying that if you just so happen to plant apple trees, you might want to consider these species, which I so happen to leave on my back porch unsupervised from Tuesday to 3 to 5 p.m. Exactly. Just saying. And these would be the repercussions. These would be what you need to look out for. The PH kid is also on the porch that I am not looking at right now. Like, it could be a cute way to kind of combine those activist communities in a way that is still... Okay, fascinating. That is, Farmer John would have to be careful because that would require publicly stating all sorts of fun stuff. But
right.
But still, that could be a really cool way to build that conversation between two, I assume, very large groups of activists.
Yes, no, absolutely, and that's something that I've been working on ways to figure out for a while. And a lot of people in the agricultural advocacy area of things are trying to figure out ways to get, because like you mentioned, consumers and agriculturalists, or consumer producer, or urban versus rural, however you want to say it, there's two sides here, and they're not communicating nearly as effectively as they need to be.
Or at all sometimes, yeah.
Exactly, or at all sometimes. And so that's kind of the purpose of like the ag communications department, like what I do with the podcast, what a lot of ag media people are trying to do, what ag teachers are trying to do, is to try to introduce both sides to each other. It's not just bring agriculture to the urban cities, but it's to try to bring the urban lifestyle to agriculture as well. Basically bridge the gap between the two and pretend like they were never separated, because at one point they weren't. And so that's something that I've been very passionate about and working really hard to try to figure out more effective ways to do that. That's actually what inspired me to bring out the whole argument of agriculture is in our movies and our video games and our TV shows, to show everybody that like, look, both of you are necessary for survival.
That's right.
Both sides are in everything. And like technology is in agriculture now, which is an urban thing.
That's right.
And
John Deere's there.
Exactly.
But he's there.
Exactly. And so like, you can't get away from, from agriculture, because we obviously all need to eat, and, and we need food, we need fiber, we need everything.
Right.
But you can't get away from urban development or technological development either, because that's what makes society run. And so I think that, any way we can improve the conversation and the relationship between those two is a good, that's a good way to go.
That is something that I'm hugely, I've told you the idea of the Faustian nonsense was a no compromise creators network. That was my whole passion with ethics, was that like I don't see why we have to have a losing battle for either. This is a cooperative endeavor. If we are saying like, well, you have to side with one, then I think you've already lost.
No, exactly.
So please keep me in the loop on that. If you have any questions about that or ideas, I'd be happy to help brainstorm stuff like that. Like I said, I'm a notorious city slicker, so you'll have to herd me in the right direction sometimes, I'm sure. But that is something that I think is hugely important to be able to build that conversation in that community.
Yeah, and I'm always looking for people to help with this, with this mission, because it is kind of a noble goal to try to unite both sides of the coin again.
Absolutely.
But I've been working really closely with a lot of other ag podcasters and other ag media people on strategies, and a lot of what I've noticed is that their strategies are, let's just talk to the wind and hope somebody finds it. Some of them are doing, which to their credit, that's actually how I started my podcast. For the first 2 years of my podcast, I was literally just interviewing farmers, and guess who was finding the information? Farmers.
Who don't really need it, right? They're living
exactly.
it, sure.
Exactly.
I'm
so
sure it's affirming,
like it wasn't
but that's
until
not quite the point.
Right. Like I'm doing something that not very many other ag podcasters or ag media people are doing, which is having conversations with non-ag people and hearing their thoughts on all of this. And so that's not to say that I'm some revolutionary in terms of how this stuff works, but I think that I've kind of figured out something.
Different approaches make different games. It's really fascinating. Well, let's talk about that outside of the podcast too. Like I said, I run a podcast network, and half of what I do is help make podcasts have a broader reach. So let me know what I can do to help ag podcasts, and I'd be happy to.
Yeah, well, we'll definitely go over that, as time goes on. I did have one more thing on my list if you still got time.
Fire away.
The fear of farm animals.
Oh gosh, yeah, okay. I knew it would make good entertainment. Fire away. What could I possibly answer?
We got to end on a funny note. We got to leave them laughing.
Absolutely, right? What, the drones didn't do it for you? Okay, go ahead.
All right. So, a few questions with this. First of all, where did it start?
I have no idea. I remember seeing a sheep. I think at some point it was the one with like the crossed eyes that are just horrifying. I remember I've always been very short. Even as a kid, I was like, I didn't have that period of time where I was like, ooh, I'm tall now, and then everybody surpassed me. Like, I was always the short kid. And I remember looking up at a sheep and thinking, oh no, absolutely not. And I think from that moment onward, I think it was maybe a petting zoo. And I was a kid, and like my mom was like, yeah, reach out, pet this nose. I was like, I don't want to do that. I'm good right here, thank you. It was basically this just overwhelming sense of how much bigger and stronger these animals are, and how absolutely incapable I was with reasoning with them. Like, I couldn't be like, hey, no, it's cool, I'm on your side. Like, it's a sheep, they don't know what that means, and I can't like wave my union flag, right? That's not meaningful either. So I was just fully aware that it was something that was live and intelligent to some degree and huge, and that was a problem for me. That's really it. There wasn't like a tragic incident or anything. I've never been like harassed or abused by farm animals, at least not to the extent that anybody would qualify as harassment. I count cows following me as harassment. I hated it, but I did climb up to the roof of my friend's barn when they all followed me, because I'm a ginger and I look very different, and apparently cows are extremely curious, so they saw this orange blob and they were like, neat friend, and I was like, oh no, not your friend, and climbed to the roof of a barn and shrieked for help so that my friend went and herded them back into their pen. I don't think I've ever made him laugh harder than that. He was like, wow, I knew you grew up in cities, but like, wow. I'm like, listen, they're large and I'm very small. This is stressful. But,
oh no.
That's really it. That's all it boils down to, is that they're big.
Okay. That's fair. So a few things on that. So you're not alone. You're like, I have met people before who have been intimidated by large animals, by mostly, by cattle and horses. Those are kind of the two biggest, aggressors. But, so I grew up, obviously riding horses because my sister, she trains them. And so I was kind of her test dummy. And so I wouldn't say I was, I wouldn't say I was always necessarily afraid of horses, but I was always somewhat uncomfortable around them, just because, like you said, they are very, very big and they're very strong, and that's a couple 1,000-pound animal. Like,
Right.
They don't have to do very much to kill you. Like,
right.
So I think that I can definitely sympathize on that front. I will say I went riding with my sister this weekend for the first time in like 2 years, and it was like the first time I've ridden a horse and felt really, really good. And like, I actually felt like I was like connecting with the horse and I wasn't scared anymore, which was awesome. Which she uses horses for therapy and that kind of stuff. Like, she actually like helps like, kids who struggle with like, mental issues with, like she has them ride horses, and it kind of helps them with that. So there's something therapeutic about working with animals. But, what's interesting is, you mentioned that animal or human behavior is kind of like, one of the things you're really interested in.
That's right.
Kind of like, the interactions between humans and how they interact with different, groups and that kind of stuff, and, how societies function together, and, the ethics of all of it, and like all that kind of stuff. So I'm a public speaker, I coach public speaking, and I have been involved in leadership for some time. So human behavior is something that really interests me too. Psychology, body language, like all of it is just really, really intriguing to me. Mm-hmm. You'd be surprised how much of it is linked to animals. Like, a surprising
lot of sense.
Yeah,
I know
so
that
surprising.
It's mirrored in like cats and dogs, and I was gonna say, to discredit my own fear, I'm not at all afraid of large cats and large dogs. I actually trained tigers for a few years. Well, a year and a half,
wow.
I guess. I know. So the tiger was fine, but I think it's because I can read like cat body language like it's nothing. It's a second language.
Right.
I grew up with cats. I wonder if that's the big off-putting thing for me, is that I have no clue what a horse is thinking at any given point in time, only that they are thinking and could kill me. And that's a bad combo. So,
and
I wonder if
that's a really, really good point, because like I said, I was really, like, when I got into high school, I became really intrigued with cattle behavior and the body language of cattle. And so my sister can read, the body language of a horse, like reading a book. Like, she can just look at a horse and tell you exactly what they're thinking, what they're going to do next. Like, she can tell you everything about that horse.
That horse is
like
about
she's
to
reading their
invest in
mind.
the stock market in this particular, I figure. Got it.
Right. And not just that, she can tell you how the horses are interacting with each other. And so like you can always, like, how there's there's this weird, like, people like assume that animals talk without talking, like they have like this weird, like, unspoken communication. That's basically what it is it's all either body language or it's like hormones. Like, those are like the only two, like, communication devices that animals have at their disposal. And obviously, like, they make sounds too, but out in the wild, sounds are kind of something that they don't make as often, because that's dangerous. That alerts others to their position. So a lot of their communication has to do with context clues. And so when it comes to interpreting their communication, you can do the same thing. This goes for all animals. They all have different levels of communication. So obviously, you said you can understand the body language of cats.
Yeah.
Dogs have their own body language. Obviously, cattle have their own. Horses have their own. Like, every animal has their own body language and behavioral patterns that can tell you exactly how they're feeling.
Sure.
And so, like, for example, I have a buddy who's a dairyman, and he, like, whenever he gets attacked by, like, animal rights activists, he always tells them, like, look at my cows. Like, I'll bring you out here to see my cows. You can see that they're laying down, chewing their cud. They're breathing really slowly. That means that they're content. They are as happy as they're going to get. And so, like, being able to break down the physiology of an animal can tell you a lot about how they're feeling about their situation.
Sure.
And so, he was able to indicate
good
that
for your pal inviting folks out. That is a really good idea to actually show.
Yeah.
You're like, listen, I'm happy that you're protective of cows. Let me show you that they're okay. Like, that's a really brilliant response to that. Good for him.
That was actually, I had the exact same response when he told me. I was like, huh, that's a really, that's
literally
kind of a bold move. But
yeah, I know, right?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know if I would have been bold enough to be like, oh, the hors d'oeuvres are on the porch. I'm behind the locked door. Like, you can do what you want. But good for him. That's really impressive.
Yeah. Yeah, but, like, to that point, if you're able to pick up on, like, even the slightest things. So, like, I'm teaching my girlfriend right now about how to read body language with both humans and animals. So I live in an apartment that's, like, literally right next door to my college, and we have the beef barns right behind the college. So I can literally walk there from my apartment. It's like a 10-minute walk,
nice.
and I usually do. That's kind of like my little therapeutic walk for the day is to walk out to the beef barns and see the cows. Yeah.
Sure.
And so I bring her out there, which, she could really use, because she grew up a city girl too, so she doesn't really get the ag exposure.
Sure.
But it's, it really helps calm her down being out there. And so I bring her out there quite a bit to, to see the animals. And I've been teaching her about the body language of the animals. So, like, every time a cow will, like, flick its head up, or it'll swish its tail, or it'll take a step, she'll ask me, what does that mean? I have to, like, interpret it for her. It's like I'm a translator.
That sounds familiar. Like, yeah, me whacking forest arm and going, what does that mean? They're looking at me. Is that that?
Yep. Yeah, but it's funny, because, like, their communication is all very simplistic, and it's very easy to interpret as long as you know what you're looking for.
Sure.
Like, if they shift their weight into one foot or another, you can tell what direction they're going to move. If they swish their tail versus if they don't, that means they're irritated. If they lift their head to you versus if they put it to the floor, that means they're either, if it's on the floor, that means that they're kind of warning you. If it's in the air, that means they're kind of watching you. If it's at eye level, then that means that they're pretty much on your side. They're your friend.
That's fascinating. Okay. So
like,
it's like
everything
almost the
means
polar
something.
opposite of dogs, then, where, like, if they're all standing up tall, like, you should be a little bit more cautious.
Yes.
Okay. Interesting. Okay, I wonder if that's also contributing to why I trained dogs for a while too. Guide dogs specifically. I wonder if that's why it's so alarming to me, because it's so very much different than cat or dog body language, and that it can even be antithesis. So that I'll be like, they're happy? No, not happy. Like, okay, got it.
See, and that's an interesting point, because now I think about it, dogs and cattle have almost complete opposite body languages. So
okay.
like you mentioned, like, if a dog keeps its head up, then that, that's kind of a, that's a sign of, like, you better watch out.
Right.
Or, like, if a dog is wagging its tail, it usually means it's a sign of happiness. If a cow is wagging its tail, you run. Like, that is not a good thing.
Okay. All right. I learned something today. And see, here I thought the prancing cattle in my head definitely were all wagging their tails, so I guess they were extremely upset. Now I know better. Okay.
Yeah. So if an animal, and this goes for most livestock because they use their tails as ways of getting rid of flies, so that they're like they're a switch.
Okay.
So if they're wagging, if their tail is moving, that typically means a sign of like irritation or annoyance because flies are annoying, so they only wag their tail when they're annoyed. So it's kind of like I don't know how in terms of like human body language, like if you have your arms crossed, that's typically right. Yeah, that's it's similar, something similar. Like in human body language, body language works as a two-way street in your brain. So like if your arms are crossed, then that means you're going to interpret the next thing somebody says as like kind of like more negatively. You're going to be more closed off to it. But if you force yourself to keep your arms open, you're naturally going to be more inclined to listen to what they say.
Yep.
And animals are the same kind of way. So like, if an animal is swishing its tail, it's because it's annoyed, because it's used to swishing its tail when it's annoyed by flies. So it's kind of like a reverse, it's like a reverse psychology kind of thing. So
okay.
With cattle, if their nose is on the ground, they're swishing their tail and they're stomping the ground, you better get out of their pen or else you're about to get rammed into a fence.
Right, okay, got it. Whereas the dog,
if
the tail is swishing, the head is low, they're saying, I'm being submissive, pet me,
yes.
I love you. Like, got it. Okay.
Yes, exactly. So yeah, just imagine like if you ever interact with cattle again, just imagine if a dog is doing this and it's a good thing, then it's a bad thing right now.
Right, got it. Okay. So the anti-dog, got it. Okay, I can work
exactly.
with that.
Exactly.
And
but yeah, so I think
it's funny that never occurred to me that it might be a matter of body language, because I spend a lot of my time defending cats because there's everybody and their mom decides to be edgy at one point and say like, oh, cats are all mean or whatever. It usually just means that they don't actually listen to their dang cat.
Right.
Who has told you like 5 times, stop or I will bite you, and then they get bit and they're like, how could you, Fluffy? Like, well, there's only so many ways Fluffy can tell you to knock it off, so
right.
Okay.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think that at the end of the day, that's where a lot of stigma around agriculture, particularly in the animal agriculture industry, comes from, is that people just there's a language barrier,
Sure.
and the ironic thing is, even like on like the metaphorical larger scale, between the farmer and the consumer, there's even a language barrier there, which causes miscommunication and often fear.
Absolutely.
So, like,
I mean, there's our organic trend again. Yeah. Like.
Yep.
Organic, grass-fed,
no, exactly.
Sustainable or whatever. Yeah, that's.
Yeah.
If you can't speak the same language, it's awful hard to cooperate.
Right. So like, your fear of large animals could be, in some part to their size, which is very understandable, but it could also be that, they can pick up on your fear because of your body language, and they can exert more of it onto you by using their body language that you just didn't know you were interpreting.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I'm sure me looking really fidgety and nervous is not exactly the most soothing thing in the world, especially if I'm already bright orange. That's already alarming. So, like, I don't fault them at all.
That's the other interesting thing, too, is that cattle are actually colorblind. They can't see color super well.
Then I don't know what it was. Maybe I was just wearing polka dots or something, but...
Yeah, so, like, their vision is kind of obscure because they're only supposed to be able to see enough to make, to keep them alive. So they can see, like, general shapes and stuff, but they can't see super vivid details, and they often can't see color because it's not a useful evolutionary resource for them.
That's wild. Okay, because I guess grass is grass. It's not like you're worried about poison grass. So
right. Well, they're also more reliant on their smell for that kind of thing too. Right. That's why they have big noses.
Oh, okay, yeah, all right. What?
So if
if
you think about it, like and like how they always say like animals like have like a sixth sense for emotion. They can pick up on people's emotion really easily.
Sure, I'm sure they can smell it.
Well, that's part of it, but my theory as to why that happens is because humans are really bad at hiding their body language.
That's very true. That is extremely true.
Right, and if you think about it, the animals don't have verbal communication. Their entire process of interpreting things is through reading your body language. So they're always looking for it. So if you do something without trying to hide it, they are going to tell it's there.
That is a fascinating theory. I would love to test that. That is absolutely fascinating, especially I could get a bunch of my old attorney friends who have tried to master the art of changing your body language at whim, and see if we can manage to communicate effectively. Because I wonder if there's also a miscommunication of like the human's head is low, like, oh, they're mad, like, no, they're just really nervous around you. Like, see if you could mimic to the alternate, like, same with cats, you want to Like I've told people before, if the cat is continuously making eye contact with you and not blinking, they don't like you. They think you're a threat and they would like for you to leave. But
You know
if
what's
they're
funny
blinking,
is that's actually true in
them saying,
cattle
I
too.
trust you. Oh really? No kidding.
Yeah.
If they don't, so they don't blink and they look at you, it's like, all right, I don't trust you. You're shady. I don't want to miss anything that you do. Okay.
So that's part of it, and if you look them back in the eye, that's a sign of a threat, and they're going to charge you.
That is fun fact. Don't do that with tigers, or they will pee on you. That is how they respond to threats. Is that or if you see a tiger turning its backside toward you and lifting its tail, they can pee about like 3 to 4 meters away.
Oh wow.
Yeah. So move to the side, not back.
Good to know. Well, that's interesting because if horses turn their backside to you, that's a sign of disrespect.
Oh, no kidding. Okay. So
yeah.
they and tigers would get along great, aside from, the carnivore prey thing. But, like,
right.
Same thing.
Well, what's
like,
funny
if a cat
is,
turns their back to you, it's like, you're not my time.
Yeah. A big thing that you learn in body language is that a lot of animals actually take after each other from body language. So, like, humans took a lot of their body language from dogs and from other, like, primates. And so, like, there's some that has to do with, like, they take some from cats, they take some from cattle, they take some from horses, but, like, a lot of their body language comes mostly from dogs and other primates. And so, like, with dogs, obviously, like, if 2 dogs are in a fight, one exposes his neck, that's a sign of, like, hey, I give up, you can kill me if you want. And usually the one won't kill him. It's not because he's a good dog, it's because he wants to show, hey, I didn't kill him, but maybe I will, so you better not mess with me.
Right.
And so
I want you to live to tell about it.
Right, yeah. So humans do that too. Humans will naturally expose their neck if they're trying to be submissive.
Yeah, tipping your head back and being like, oh, that's not what I meant, and backpedaling, the literal sense of leading away. Yeah, that is true.
Right. Yep, or if they lower their head, that typically means that they're not confident in what they're going to say. If they raise their head, like they're looking down at you from above their nose, that means they're kind of trying to be condescending. Like, there's a lot of, similarities between, like, the animal kingdom's body language and human body language, and that's why animals can read us like a book and we have no idea what they're thinking.
I bet, yeah. All right, so maybe that's my to-do list. Then is get good at learning cow and horse body language, which I'm sure will do a lot of trial and error. But that'll be my to-do list post quarantine. Is go find me a cow that is very patient and try to learn. There you go.
Hey, just if you can find any local dairies or beef ranches, then go ask them.
I'm sure there's tons.
Oh, there are many. Yep. Yeah. Just look around and don't be afraid. This is something I always tell people. Like, if you want to learn about agriculture, go find local farms and ask the farmer. More often than not, they'll say, okay, come on, I'll show you around.
That is so cool. Okay, so that wouldn't be like, there's a farmer's market that comes into town on Saturday. Well, I assume it will come back post-quarantine, but would that be like an okay thing to ask a farmer of, like, would you mind showing me? So I'm curious, is that a respectful thing to ask?
Yeah, and just, show them that you have a genuine interest.
Yes.
Don't make it seem as though, like, you want to expose them or anything. Just say, like, hey, I had some questions.
Ignore the
I've been learning
scarf.
Right. Yeah. Maybe leave the animal blood soaked fur at home. Just kind of, like, show up and just say, like, hey, I've been learning a lot about agriculture. And, like, maybe even mention some of the things that you've learned here today, and just say, like, hey, I'm really curious about your operation. Like, I won't videotape anything. I just want to see. I want to learn about your operation. And they'll more often than not be like, yeah, come on, I'll show you.
Red flag too. That makes sense. Good for them. Then a lawyer friend has warned them accurately. Good job.
Yep.
Good.
No, there aren't many farms you can videotape on nowadays without some kind of permission or signing a waiver or something.
I'm sure having a very angry farmer on you, and rightly so, really, because it's a really rude thing to do. But yeah, okay, cool. All right, then I'll try that.
Yeah.
I'll see if I can make some friends. I've wanted to go poke at beekeeping folks too, which I suppose is like the ultra hard mode of trying to learn body language. Maybe I should start with cattle. But,
You'd be surprised. Beekeeping apparently has its own body language thing that they like. I wouldn't be able to understand it, but I talked to a beekeeper.
Like wasp keepers too, because apparently there are some wasps that produce honey, and like you can make friends because they recognize your face and all that stuff. That's wild.
Yeah, no, I had a beekeeper on an episode a couple weeks back, and he was telling me about like all kinds of stuff about like, oh yeah, if the bees trust you, like if you get on the queen's good side, then the bees will trust you and they won't attack you. But if you squish one of them in front of them, then they'll all try to kill you, and it's like this whole thing. And I was like, oh, fair enough.
Yeah, no, that is super fair. Like, if you just slaughtered one of my friends in front of me, I'd be like, okay, well, that's not great. We're not on good terms now. Like, that's super fair.
Right.
All right. That's super valid. So, okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Brendan. This has been so much fun. I am happy to be a resource for you, for your ag podcast networks and stuff. If you guys have any questions or anything, feel free to reach out to Faustian Nonsense. We're we're brand new and we're enthusiastic, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and hopefully we can help out.
Awesome.
And thanks for teaching me everything. I really enjoyed learning.
Yeah, no, it was a lot of fun to have you on. You had some really good questions. We had some good, some good laughs and definitely some good conversation, which is always the kind of the plan is to get, if one of us learns something, then we've done something good.
Right. And I promise I will send you weird fruit that I remember too, so you can
Awesome.
go find it.
And I'll send you articles on happy cows.
Yes, please. Thank you. I need to learn.
So before we close out, if you'd like to, you can go ahead and plug anything you want to plug, any projects or anything you're working on that you want people to find you on.
Oh gosh, sure. So like I've mentioned a couple times, Jack and I run Faustian Nonsense. You can find us at faustiannonsense.com. We currently have one podcast that is live, Rank and Vile, which ranks all horror movies ever made, from Spooky Buds, which is the Air Buds Halloween film, to like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the whole ordeal. And this is run by Quincy Rhodes and Ryan. Last name escapes me. Shoot, I've been friends with them for like years. Well, the whole point is that it's a humorous take and a ranking system that is based off of relativity. So what they'll do is they'll say, all right, is it better or worse than Alien? Is it better or worse than blah, blah, blah? And they'll work their way up the list. So it's a pretty non-conventional ranking, because sometimes you don't get to compare to the one that you wanted to compare to if it's pulled up randomly. It also helps teach folks about what makes something a horror film. Like I mentioned, Alien. Ryan staunchly insists that it is a horror film instead of just sci-fi, and makes a pretty good argument for it. I learned a whole lot about horror as a genre, because I was initially like, I don't know if I love the concept of just being scared as a hobby, until they explained to me about the idea of catharsis through horror films and being able to cope with difficult things. And this has ended up being really popular with folks during quarantine for reasons I'm sure you can imagine. But Rank and Vile is currently live. The Lavender Tavern is going to be live February 14th, and the full first season will be out in one fell swoop. It is adult fairy tales with a queer bent. So it has like that moral of the day kind of vibe to it, and they're about 30 minutes apiece. They're really good. We just finished wrapping season 1's recordings, and Jonathan Cohen, the writer of them, really just did an incredible job. And finally, we've got Jack of All Trades, which I spoiled a little bit with Tulare. That will be out probably sometime in June. It is a full-scale production with sound effects, sound design, score, everything. So take that with a grain of salt, June. But all first season's all recorded and everything, or all just in post now. And then a Patreon exclusive called The Idiot's Guide to Quitting Your Day Job, which is an audio journal by Jack and I about why we quit our day jobs to found Faustian Nonsense, and how we're going to maintain it and make it possible for other people to do so as well.
Nice.
Yeah. So come check us out.
Awesome. Yeah, for sure. And whenever I get the episode ready, then I'll ask you again. You can send me any links that you want me to share. I'll put those down in the description and send people your way.
Oh, that's lovely. Thank you. And I'll do the
Awesome.
same. I'll post a blog about it and send folks to talk ag to me. It's thus far a fantastic experience.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad that you've had a good time, and you're always welcome back on if you have more questions, which I'm sure you will at some point.
I'm sure. Yeah. See, you already know me.
Yeah. So.
All right. Well,
awesome.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. And, thanks to all my listeners for tuning in. If you guys have any questions for Amie, you can reach out to either her or me, and we'll make sure to get those answered. But yeah, so I think this was a fun episode, and I hope to hear back from you soon and from all of you guys soon next week. And don't forget, if you ate today, thank a farmer.
Well, thank you then, Brendan.